Welcome to Caregiver Chats. I'm Dr. Lakelyn, and today we'll be talking about 5 tips to set you up for your caregiving journey. So stay tuned and we'll get into it. Caregiver Chats is a podcast designed to help those caring for older adults find balance, support, resources, and encouragement. If you're caring for an aging family member or friend, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Dr. Lakelyn. I'm a gerontologist and caregiving advocate for Homestead, an honor company. I know how busy caregivers are, and I'm so grateful that you're taking the time to listen. Last episode, we talked about, am I really a caregiver? And if you're unsure if you're a caregiver, you may want to go back and listen to episode 1. You can also listen to the trailer to learn more about my background and what this podcast is all about. For today's episode, I'm going to focus on 5 tips to set you up for your caregiving journey. Whether you're brand new to caregiving because your loved one recently experienced a crisis, or if you've been caregiving for years, these tips can help set you up for success. Okay, so the 5 tips are: first, get organized. Second, communication is key. 3, build your support network. Number 4 is don't delay caregiver self-care. And number 5 is be as proactive as possible. I'm going to jump into each of these 5 tips now. The first tip is to get organized. I absolutely love to organize. I'm a little bit of a type A personality. Throughout my many years of schooling, there was nothing better than my back to school shopping where I'd get my binders and notebooks and my fresh calendar planner. And on the first day of class, I'd be so excited to get that syllabus, mark down all those important dates in the class schedule. Again, I just loved to organize. But even if you're not typically an organized person, it really does help as a caregiver to create a system that works for you so that you can keep track of all things caregiver related. If you're the one in charge of the care of your aging loved one, most likely you'll need to understand and manage his or her household tasks, medical documents, financial and legal affairs. So there is a lot to get organized. And the key is to centralize these important documents, whether it's a power of attorney, for short, we call that POA. It could be bank information, healthcare documents, the doctor's information, the long-term care insurance, emergency contacts, and so forth. And you want to think about the best place to store it. Maybe you're kind of an electronic person. You want to use a Google Drive, or if you like to have that printed hard copy, you can do that. You can print it out and store it in a secure place at home or in a safety deposit box. But once you've kind of identified where you want to store it, you need to make sure that those that need to know where these documents are in the know. Maybe it's your siblings, maybe it is that power of attorney, the lawyer, whoever, again, needs to know where these documents are. Make sure that that's communicated. And in an upcoming episode, I hope to go more in detail on all of these documents because it's really important. And recently, I had a conversation with an elder law attorney all about this topic, the important documents and the legal considerations. So if you want to listen to that conversation, I'll have a link in the show notes. You can go check it out. So in addition to the binder of key documents, it can also be helpful to keep a journal or record of all the important aspects of the person's care. It could, when we talk about this in the home care world, we call it a care plan. And whenever we start services with a new client, we gather all sorts of information and put it into that care plan so that when the professional caregiver, the care professional, walks into the home, they have all that important documentation and information at hand. And so we want to kind of do the same thing for you and your family. For your loved one, it can be helpful to share with everyone that's involved how your loved one likes to be cared for. And heaven forbid, if something were to happen to you as the primary caregiver, this journal or care plan, whatever you want to call it, could be handed over to another person and would give them a great overview of what care would need to be provided. Again, we hope that you stay healthy as a caregiver and that doesn't happen, but we do have to be practical as caregivers. And this can be a living, breathing document, one that you update regularly, especially if the individual has a hospitalization or maybe someone that was included in the documents, like a spouse passes away. We have to update some of those documents, like a power of attorney. So this is going to be a living, breathing document that you update regularly. And some other things that you might want to include in kind of this care plan type document is an updated medication list. You want to keep record of, when medications are taken, and you want to review this before and after every doctor's appointment to make sure, if there's any medication changes that is updated. You might also include their daily and weekly care routines. If the person wakes up at a certain time, if they need assistance with dressing or bathing, maybe they don't like to take a bath, they prefer a shower a couple times a week. Those are really important details that can help others involved in the care routine provide the best care possible. Also, any important nutrition information, if they have any allergies or dietary restrictions, especially if they have to watch their intake for things like salt, sugar, or carbs due to maybe a chronic condition. You can also include, some of their favorite foods, things to avoid. I know for my grandma, my aunt made sure that everyone in our family knows that her favorite restaurants are, I won't go into that, but she just makes sure we know, her favorite restaurants, and also that she loves to get soup to go from our local Lithuanian bakery. So it's little things like that that are going to make that care plan really special and personalized to that individual. And then also include, weekly or regular events that they enjoy doing, anything really that's on a regular schedule. Going back to my grandma again, she gets her hair done every Thursday morning at the same time, same place. She plays bridge every Friday afternoon at the same time, same place with the same group of ladies. And then on Sunday morning, she loves to go to Mass, the same service. So again, those are kind of those routine things that you want to include in this care plan. Maybe it's that they love to go to a monthly book club, or they like to see shows at the community theater. All those little things can make caring for that person more personalized. And again, you can include that in the care plan. You might also consider creating a schedule or shared calendar to help everyone involved in the care of that individual track important events, maybe who's picking the person up, who's taking them home at the end. I know my husband and I, we kind of live and die by our shared calendar. It helps immensely with our communication. And I hear from so many family caregivers that a shared calendar has been so helpful for staying organized. You could use Google Calendar, or there's an app that one of my coworkers recommends. It's called Cozy. And so 2 more quick tips on staying organized. The first goes back to medication. So staying on top of that medication can sometimes be overwhelming and time consuming. And my advice would be to keep it as simple as possible. I worked with a family. The son thought it would be more efficient to get one of those giant pill boxes that had slots for AM, noon, and PM meds 7 days a week, but he filled it with 3 weeks worth of meds. This made sense to him, but to his mom, who had cognitive impairment, it was very confusing. It was confusing to me, who kind of just came into the care situation. And so we found that his mom was either taking too many meds or missing medication, again, because what he thought was an efficient system was actually really complicating it for his mom. So I helped this family set up a mail order prepackaged medication service that, prepackaged the meds into individual pouches, labeled it with the day and the time. It made a world of difference, and you could see it in her mood and her health. So again, medication management is such an important aspect of being a caregiver. So you might find a service that is most efficient for you. You could look into things like PillPack, SelectRx. I think Amazon has a service nowadays. So you just do a quick Google search to find others. Your local pharmacy in your community might also have some sort of pill organizing system. And the kind of old-fashioned pill box is another great option. And Talking to your local pharmacist also can be a huge help. They're often a best kept secret. I'm actually going to talk about that in the next episode of this podcast, so I hope you'll join me to learn more. And my final thought on getting organized is all about setting priorities. A few years back, I was talking with Ann Tomlinson. She's a family caregiver and the founder of Daughterhood. I'll link to her website in the show notes. She made a really interesting analogy. She said, think of yourself as the caregiver as being a CEO. Yes, a CEO of a company. And if you think about it, CEOs are in charge of making decisions for their companies and they set priorities. They determine what's important for their organization. So if you are a CEO caregiver, for you, your priority could be the safety of your loved one. Maybe it's your own mental health. Maybe you prioritize getting to all of your kids' soccer games because that's really important to you. But whatever the priorities are, it's going to be different for every caregiver situation. But once you set those priorities, every decision can be guided back to those priorities. You can also hand out assignments and delegate. CEOs are really good at delegating because, in order to achieve those priorities, you're likely going to need help. And it might be hard to ask for help, but again, to get these priorities done, you're going to need some support. So remember, there's only one of you, and you are a precious resource. You have limited time and energy, and we want to make sure that you're able to continue in your role as a caregiver. And we'll talk more about reaching out for help and creating your support network in just a bit, because that's another one of my tips. And if you want to hear more of my conversation that I had with Ann about being the CEO of your caregiving situation, I'll also link to my chat with her in the show notes, and again, to her Daughterhood website. So that was tip number 1, getting organized. So the second tip is communication is key. This is so true for so many areas of our life. When there is good communication, things tend to run more smoothly. The same goes for caregiving. It's important to communicate, I think, with 3 key stakeholders in your caregiving situation. 1, the person that you're caring for. 2, others involved in the care, and this could be family, friends, or professionals. And then 3, those outside of your caregiving relationship, like your spouse, kids, friends, and even your employer. Communication, especially around touchy topics, can be tricky from time to time, but at Home Instead, we have a great free downloadable guide that helps families navigate important conversations. So be sure to check that out in our show notes. So again, I mentioned those 3 key stakeholders. Let's talk about communicating with that first stakeholder, the person that you're caring for. As a gerontologist, I feel really passionately that the older person you're caring for needs to be heard and understood. We can't just make decisions about their care without including them in the discussion. Even if the person has some sort of cognitive impairment, we still need to include them as much as possible. And if the person that you're caring for feels heard and feels like they're part of the plan or the solution, they're going to be more likely to get kind of bought in or accept that care or the solution that you guys have decided on. But again, not all discussions will be easy. For example, 2 hard ones that I talk to caregivers about regularly are, the driving conversation, when to take away the keys, and end-of-life planning. And you might need to bring up these sensitive topics multiple times to finally get them to talk about it. And I wanted to share kind of 2 quick tips on some approaches that you might find helpful, again, for these tricky conversations. So first would be to bring up the topic and tell them that you would like to discuss it at a later date. So for example, you could say, Dad, I know it's getting darker earlier. I'd really like to talk with you about driving. Can we pick a time in the next couple days to sit down and chat about it? Sometimes people need to process information, so prompting them about a future conversation can really help, again, if they're a processor. Sometimes people don't like to feel caught off guard. So again, you can suggest the topic and a future date to discuss. Another approach that can be helpful is to share another person's story to spur the conversation. So here's an example. Hey, Mom, my friend just went through a medical scare with her mom, and they hadn't talked about anything. And it really caused my friend a lot of stress because she had to make some really hard decisions and didn't know if it's what her mom would have wanted. Can we talk about some of your wishes so I would know what to do if our family was in a similar situation? So again, you're taking someone else's story and kind of prompting it to have a conversation. And you might need to try approaching these conversations several times in order to finally get them to chat about it. But again, if you're able to communicate ahead of time before a crisis, that is ideal. But when it comes to more of that day-to-day communication, it's important to find effective ways to communicate with everyone involved in your loved one's care. So that's that second stakeholder group. It could be, again, through that shared journal or care plan or that shared calendar. Some families find that an email or text string can help everyone stay in the loop. In my family, we have a group text. It's called Grandma's Drivers. And if my aunt, who is the primary caregiver, can't get grandma where she needs to go, she texts the group the date and the time, and then someone chimes in that they're available. You have to find a system that works best for you. And there's a lot of apps out there that can help caregivers. So if you have found a helpful app or a great way to stay connected, please email me. My email is in the show notes. Others involved in the care can include the care professionals. Often older adults are seeing multiple doctors or care providers, and it can be challenging to keep all of that information straight. So if you can stay on top of that medication list and bring it to all of the appointments, along with any other notes or insights on the person you're caring for, that can make the appointment more productive. Often the doctors are not talking to one another or to the other healthcare professionals involved in that person's care. Unless you're lucky to be part of a healthcare system that has great care managers or nurse navigators. But if I'm keeping it real, it's likely going to fall on you, the caregiver. So it's important to stay organized again and help facilitate that communication. Other professionals might include home care or home health providers that come into the home. Often these providers have their own ways of communicating with families. For example, at Home Instead, we have a family portal that families can log into to see the schedule of care and information on the various activities that they are there to assist with. So again, check in with those providers to see what communication tools they use. And then that final group of stakeholders that's important to communicate with are those outside of your caregiving relationship, like your spouse, kids, friends, or employers. When it comes to your spouse and kids, it can be helpful to set expectations and check in regularly. Often caregiving becomes a family affair, but it can put a strain on these relationships. So checking in regularly and providing a safe space to share emotions like sadness and frustration and disappointment can help open communication. And when it comes to friends, I hear a lot of caregivers talk about how friendships can often get put on the back burner, and friends might not understand what you're going through or might get frustrated when you say no over and over to their invitations. But it can be helpful to be open and honest with them and let them know, hey, I love when you invite me. I know I don't say yes every time, but please keep asking. And you can also find ways to kind of kill two birds with one stone. Maybe you go on a walk with a friend, so you're getting some physical activity and still getting that friend time. Or maybe you sit by each other at the kids' soccer game, or invite them to grab coffee with you as you wait for your loved one's hair appointment to get done. So again, it might take a little creative thinking or strategizing to maintain those connections, but it is really important to have that support system. And then that final group that I mentioned is your employer. If you feel comfortable talking with your employer, it can be really helpful to tell them about your caregiving responsibilities. Open communication with your employer allows both for the opportunity to plan and prioritize your tasks at work. There might also be benefits that you're eligible for through your Employee Assistance Program, EAP for short. It could be something like a mental health resource, or some even have care coordinating resources for family caregivers. And there's a lot of complexities when it comes to working family caregivers. And this is a topic I hope to dive deeper on in a later episode. But I have linked to some helpful resources in the show notes if you're working while caregiving. So that was tip number 2, all about communication. Tip number 3 is building your support network. Caregiving should not take place in a vacuum. You need support to make sure that you don't get burnt out. There may be people in your life right now that you consider to be in that support network, but I hope that these tips can help you maybe expand your thinking about who could be included in that support network. So first, try to engage your siblings in the care. Some of you may already have siblings helping out, or you might have ones that are refusing to help. But the key here is to consider their strengths and their capacity to support. I like to use my own family as an example. Thankfully, my parents are still in great health, but I anticipate one day this is how it will all play out. So first, I'm the oldest of 4 kids. I work in this industry. I'm a gerontologist, so I would likely be the primary caregiver. I'd keep the calendar, I'd organize the day-to-day, I'd provide probably that daily care. My youngest sister is a nurse. She would likely be the one to go to those healthcare appointments and ask all the right questions. She probably would also be the one to help with personal care, with bathing my mom, that sort of thing. She'd also probably be in charge of setting up the medicine set week to week. And she's also really good at having tough conversations with our parents, so she'd probably be the one to tackle that as well. Then you have my brother. He was a finance major. He loves the outdoors. He's also a fantastic cook. So I could see him coming into the caregiving situation to help manage the finances, to help maybe with the physical upkeep of my parents' house, and also cook a few meals a couple times a week. My mom absolutely loves his cooking. But we all do. Let's be real. And then we have another sister who lives in New York City. So she would be the long distance caregiver in our family scenario. And she is a social butterfly. So I know she would be one to call every day to check in with my parents and provide them with some socialization. She'd also be willing to help out with things like online ordering. She'd be one checking in on us siblings as well, making sure that we're all doing okay. She would help to organize paperwork. And then she would also visit regularly to give us local caregivers a break. So I challenge you to think about your own family and those that might be available to support you as part of your support network. You need to be realistic about what they can and cannot assist with and openly communicate. And also be honest and straightforward about what you need from them, especially when it comes to males. No offense, gentlemen, but sometimes you just need to tell them exactly what you need them to do and when you need them to do it. Another type of support that can be helpful to add to your network is professional support. And this can come in various forms. Home care is one type of professional support that comes into the home to support your loved one. Anyone can hire home care. There's no need for a doctor's order. There are 3 ways to go about finding home care providers. Option 1, you can go through an agency like Home Instead. Option 2, you can go through a registry like care.com. And option 3, you can find an independent care professional, which could be a friend or a neighbor. There's a lot to consider when hiring home care, so we've linked to a free downloadable guide in the show notes that goes into more detail and has great questions to consider and to ask providers when you're looking for care. Now, home care differs from home health care. That might be a more kind of common term to you. That would be for something like physical therapy, and it's something that you would need a doctor's order for. So you can always call your physician's nurse line to discuss the recommended care and to talk through the options for home health and home care. Another option for professional support is adult day centers. This is where you would take your loved one to a center during the daytime. Another option to look for in support is your local area agency on aging. They might have a respite program that you could be eligible for that gives you a break from caregiving. And then finally, hospice. If your loved one's nearing the end of their life, their end of journey on earth, hospice is a wonderful service that you can look into. One last group of people to add to your support network may be ones you haven't considered yet. They're typically people outside of your caregiving scenario. It could be your faith community, your friends, maybe it's your kids' friends' parents, a neighbor, your coworker, a cousin, anyone in your life that says, let me know how I can help. And here are some examples of how they could help. They could help carpool your kids to the sporting events that they have. It could be a neighbor that texts you each time they go to the grocery store asking, hey, what can I pick up for you? Maybe it's a church volunteer that takes your loved one or family member to a weekly Bible study or a service at the synagogue. Maybe it's a friend that comes by once a week for coffee with your parent so that you can get out and run some errands. It could also include joining a support group to connect with other caregivers going through a shared experience. Or if you have a cousin that's a great cook, maybe they drop by a meal once a week. And on the topic of meals, I wanted to share a great story of my coworker, Dan, and his family. His dad had dementia, and his mom was the primary caregiver. And people kept asking if they could bring over a meal and stop by and chat. And the family wanted to encourage this, but entertaining often became overwhelming for his mom, who was already balancing so much as a caregiver. So they created a rule that people could bring over a meal and stay for dinner, but they had to take home the leftovers and they had to eat on paper plates. This really helped to alleviate the burden on his mom to clean up and to deal with the leftovers, but it really allowed for that great social connection that everyone was craving. So again, you might feel like this is a bit of a stretch. How can I extend my social network or my support network? But letting others help out, even in these small ways, can actually go a long way in helping to lift some of that caregiving burden. And so that wraps up the tip on building your support network. Next is tip number 4, but first is a word from our sponsor. This podcast is brought to you by Home Instead, an honor company. If you find yourself needing extra support as a family caregiver or time away from your caregiving responsibilities, Home Instead can help. Our home care services are delivered by compassionate care professionals and range from personal care, meal preparation, and medication management to Alzheimer's care and hospice support. Visit homeinstead.com to learn more and to find a location near you. Tip number 4 is don't delay caregiver self-care. Caregiving should not come at the expense of your own physical and mental well-being. No matter where you're at in your caregiving journey, find ways to engage in self-care. Self-care is not selfish. It's actually really important for your future health. A caregiver once told me that it took her about 3 years after her mom passed away to get her own health back. She wished she would have done more for her self-care. So hopefully that is kind of a lesson learned that you can all take away. The topic of self-care involves a lot of things, and we often know what we should be doing, but we have to hear it often. We have to be reminded, and it's helpful to learn some kind of quick tips for self-care. Our healthy habits and lifestyles in our 30s, 40s, and 50s, and even 60s can impact how we will age. So I know you're caring for an aging loved one. You're seeing what your loved one's going through. So you also want to think about your own health and your own aging journey, and what you're doing now in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s can impact your heart health and your brain health. A recent study came out in the JAMA Neurology Journal in September of 2022, and it found that just walking 10,000 steps per day, well, just 10,000 is actually kind of a lot, but just walking every day can lower your risk of dementia. I've linked to that in the show notes if you want to learn more. But again, it's these little things that we can do to engage in self-care that serves our future self. Again, self-care is not selfish. it is not selfish. So make sure you're taking time for you. So first, a quick tip, stay on top of your own healthcare appointments. Caregivers can become so focused on getting the person they're caring for to every single appointment that they need to get to that they often find themselves canceling theirs or putting theirs off. And that can have some unfortunate health consequences. So make sure you're getting to your own appointments. Next is to try to eat healthy and hydrate. It can be hard to find time to eat healthy, but it could be as simple as adding an extra serving of fruits and veggies, or trying to cut back on processed foods, or finding a healthier alternative to some of those guilty pleasures. For me, I love dessert, especially ice cream. So I found an alternative of a little bit of yogurt with some fruit after dinner can help me curb those dessert cravings. Also, staying hydrated is key. Drinking lots of water. There's so many health benefits. You also want to try your best to exercise, and it can be as simple as going for a walk around the block or doing a short yoga video on YouTube. You can also combine it with social interaction by attending a workout class or going on a walk with a friend. One caregiver shared with me that before caregiving for her dad, she would go regularly to in-person yoga classes. And since becoming a caregiver, she misses that so much, but she found that she still gets great benefits from doing yoga in her living room through YouTube. It's her escape for a few times per week, helps her recenter herself. So you have to find something that works for you. Also, focus on your sleep. I know, again, that can be hard depending on your caregiving circumstances, but research is finding that sleep has a strong tie to our brain health. And a consistent sleep routine has the best benefits. So try going to bed and waking up around the same time each day, and try your best for at least 7 hours of sleep per night. Again, I know sometimes it's easier said than done, but sleep is so important. Also, we know that caregiving is emotional, so it's important to find a healthy outlet for those emotions to help manage your mental health. Maybe it's journaling, going to regular counseling sessions, maybe having a friend or a confidant that you can share with, or perhaps it's joining a support group, or a combination of these things. Caregivers are at a higher risk for anxiety and depressive symptoms, so it's important to check in with yourself and seek professional help if needed. And then finally, stay social. Caregiving can be very isolating, so try to maintain those friendships and social connections, like I mentioned earlier. And this may be hard because caregivers, again, they share that friends tend to kind of pull away, or friendships are hard to maintain while caregiving. So in this case, you might want to focus on quality over quantity. Focus on a few of those really meaningful relationships and prioritize them. I mentioned this earlier, you could also incorporate socializing into a healthy habit like going for a walk with a friend. But again, at the end of the day, caregiver self-care is not selfish, so please make sure you're making time for yourself. All right, the final tip is here, tip number 5, and that's be proactive. No one is perfect, but there's a lot you can do to be proactive in your caregiving. And being proactive goes hand in hand with being organized, which I talked about earlier. If your loved one is living at home or living with you, you can be proactive in terms of their home safety. Identify potential risks and hazards in the home, and then work to correct them. Falls occur most often, we find, in the kitchen and the bathroom, so make sure especially that those areas are set up for success for your loved one. Things like grab bars, getting rid of rugs, or taping them down to the floor can really help to reduce hazards. In the show notes, I've linked to a great free downloadable checklist that goes through each room of the house and helps identify potential hazards and then suggests tips on how to reduce risks in each room. So be sure to check it out. Next, consider the short and long-term care needs of the person you're caring for. Think about, not only what are the person's needs today, but what if they need more care down the road? What is that going to look like? What if we need to move this person into a community living setting? Having those conversations now can help everyone get aligned on desires and wishes. And then when it comes to the day-to-day care and support you provide, make sure you give yourself plenty of time and also try to anticipate the needs of the person you're caring for. So, for example, if you're preparing for a doctor's appointment, consider the best time of day for that individual. Maybe they're most alert in the mornings, so make sure to schedule that appointment in the morning, but allow enough time to get up, dressed, and ready for that appointment. Make sure you have your med list in hand along with your questions and notes to be prepared and make that appointment the most effective it can be. One final part of being proactive is preparing for emergencies. And I know this sounds kind of extreme, but it's important to consider because I've seen this time and time again. Not only have we seen caregivers experience, natural disasters, maybe a house fire, or maybe their loved one has a medical emergency, but also something could potentially happen to you as a caregiver. And again, we hope that never happens, but in order to prepare for these moments, we need to make sure that we have those important documents and information in a centrally located place. And again, we talked about that earlier in tip number 1. We do have a great downloadable free guide that can help you get organized. If a natural disaster is in the forecast, be sure to have extra food, medication, and supplies on hand. And heaven forbid there's a fire, you want to make sure that you're changing out the batteries in the smoke detector regularly, or contact your local fire department. They'll actually install smoke detectors for free. And in case of a medical emergency for you, the primary caregiver, you want to be sure that there is a backup plan in place for care. Again, we hope you never have to use it. But what's that old saying? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So whether you're new to caregiving or if you've been at it for a while, being proactive will surely pay off. So there you have it. Those were the 5 tips for setting yourself up for a successful caregiving journey. Some days caregiving will be challenging, and the journey is sure to throw you a few curveballs. But remember to look for the small victories and happy moments throughout. And remind yourself often that what you're doing for the person you're caring for is important and it does matter. If you're setting yourself up for success with these tips, then hopefully it will help to make your journey a little smoother. Are there any tips that you would have added to this list? Well, if you can think of some, please email me at caregiverchats@homeinsteadinc. That's homeinsteadinc.com with your suggestions and questions. I hope you will join me for the next episode as I cover the top 10 helpful resources that every caregiver needs to know. In the meantime, I invite you to follow us on Facebook and Instagram at homeinsteadinc. Again, that's homeinsteadinc for previews of upcoming episodes, caregiving tips, and more. You can find all of the links in today's show notes. Thanks for listening, and please remember to take good care of yourself while you care for others. Caregiver Chats is brought to you by Home Instead. If you're looking for in-home care to support you on your caregiving journey, please visit homeinstead.com/caregiverchats to learn more.